Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we are telling the story of Kristin Nelson, a woman born into California privilege, married into one of America's most famous television families, and later pulled into one of the most painful family battles Hollywood had seen. This is not simply a story about fame. It is not only about Ricky Nelson, Mark Harmon, Ozzie and Harriet, addiction, divorce, or a custody war that became public. This is a story about what happens when the image of a perfect family becomes more important than the people inside it. From the outside, Kristin Nelson seemed to have everything. She had famous parents, beauty, opportunity, talent, a teenage romance with one of America's most beloved young stars, and a life that looked almost designed for magazine covers. But behind that glossy image was a woman who would face addiction, betrayal, grief, legal battles, family conflict, and the terrible pain of trying to hold on to her children while the world judged her from a distance. So do I agree with the idea that Kristin Nelson's life was a tragedy hidden behind Hollywood glamour? Yes, I do, but I also believe it is too simple to describe her only as tragic. Kristin Nelson was not just a victim. She was also an artist, a mother, a flawed human being, a survivor, and a woman who kept trying to rebuild herself even after her life had fallen apart again and again. And that is why her story matters. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who enjoys true Hollywood stories, and subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the motivation to keep creating powerful stories about the real lives behind the fame, the family names, and the headlines. Now, let's begin. Kristin Nelson was born Kristin Harmon on June 25, 1945, in Burbank, California. If Hollywood had designed a child to represent post-war California promise, it might have designed someone like her. Her father, Tom Harmon, was a legendary football player and Heisman Trophy winner. Her mother, Elise Knox, was a model and actress. Even before Kristin made any choices of her own, she inherited a world of image, beauty, athletic achievement, celebrity, and expectation. That kind of childhood can look like a gift. And in many ways, it was. But it can also become a cage. When a child grows up inside a family already admired by others, there is often an invisible pressure to remain admirable. You learn early that people are watching. You learn that the family photo must look right. You learn that problems should be managed quietly, behind closed doors, because public embarrassment feels like failure. This is important because Kristin's adult life would become a battle between the public image and the private truth. Again and again, the people around her seemed invested in appearances, the wholesome family, the perfect marriage, the successful children, the celebrity legacy. But human beings are not television sets. You cannot adjust the lighting and make pain disappear. When Kristin was still a child, her family became close with another famous family, the Nelsons. To understand what that meant, you have to understand how powerful the Nelson family image was in American culture. Ozzie and Harriet Nelson were not just entertainers. They represented an ideal. Their television show, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, presented a version of American family life that felt warm, stable, clean, and reassuring. And then there was Ricky Nelson. Ricky was not only a television star. He became a teenage idol and a successful singer. He had the kind of clean-cut charm that made parents trust him and young fans adore him. He was famous, handsome, musical, and already part of a family brand that America loved. Kristin, as a young girl, became connected to that world. Over time, her attention turned toward Ricky. Their relationship had the quality of a teenage dream, two attractive young people from famous families, moving inside the golden atmosphere of California celebrity. To the outside world, it must have looked almost too perfect. But perfection, especially in Hollywood, is often a warning sign. Kristin was not only a pretty girl near famous people. She was also developing as an artist. Painting became an important part of her identity. After the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, she created a painting of the Kennedy family in the White House. Jacqueline Kennedy eventually purchased it. That detail tells us something vital. Kristin had talent beyond the family names connected to her. She had her own eye, her own sensitivity, her own creative ambition. This part of her life should not be overlooked. Too often, women in Hollywood history are remembered mainly by the men around them, whose daughter they were, whose wife they became, whose sister they were, whose mother they became. Kristin Harmon Nelson was surrounded by famous men, Tom Harmon, Ricky Nelson, Mark Harmon. But she was also a person with her own creative life. She painted. She acted. She tried to make something that belonged to her. That matters because later, when the story becomes dark, we should not reduce her to scandal. She was not born as a custody case. She was not born as a troubled ex-wife. She was a young woman with gifts, dreams, and a future that once seemed wide open. Then life accelerated. While dating Ricky Nelson, Kristin became pregnant as a teenager. In the early 1960s, this was not treated with the same public complexity we might recognize today. A teenage pregnancy could threaten reputations, especially in a family built around wholesome entertainment. The Nelson brand depended on innocence, order, and moral respectability. A pregnant teenage girlfriend did not fit that carefully protected picture. Kristin and Ricky married in 1963. She was only 17. Let us pause there. Imagine standing inside a beautiful house where everyone else sees chandeliers, photographs, and success, but you know the foundation is cracking. You try to tell people, and they say, "That house looks fine to me." Eventually, you begin to wonder whether you are the problem. That is part of the psychological cruelty of image. Kristin tried to take action. At one point, while Ricky was away, she packed his things and moved him into a separate rented house. This was an extreme move, but it came from a marriage that had already become extreme in its dysfunction. Ricky moved into the house and soon, according to the story, Kristin found him there with other women. Infidelity had become part of the marriage's destruction. Ricky reportedly had many affairs, especially on the road. The number attached to those affairs may sound sensational, but whether the number was literal or exaggerated, the emotional truth is clear: Kristin felt betrayed repeatedly. But Kristin's own life was not free of scandal either. The story includes claims about her own sexual history, including a controversial encounter connected to Ronald Reagan's family. Whether presented as gossip or revelation, these details became part of the larger public picture of a woman whose life had moved far away from the wholesome image she once represented. And this is where we need to be careful. When women in public life fall into scandal, the judgment often becomes especially harsh. A famous man's affairs may be treated as part of his rock and roll legend. A woman's sexual choices are often used to define her entire character. Ricky's behavior and Kristin's behavior should both be viewed honestly, but not through a double standard. The point is not that Kristin was innocent in every way. She was not. The point is that everyone in this story was human, flawed, and caught in a destructive environment. There are few pains deeper than losing access to your child. Even when intervention is necessary, even when adults are trying to protect a child, the emotional wound is enormous. Parenthood is not just a legal role. It is identity. To have a court question that identity can feel like being erased. Then the conflict intensified. During the custody battle, accusations flew in both directions. Kristin accused Pam Dauber of past substance use. Mark and Pam responded with claims about Kristin's behavior and parenting. The case became a public bloodbath, exactly the kind of spectacle that destroys families even when it is supposedly meant to solve a family problem. This is where one of the most important lessons emerges. There are moments when being right is not the same as being healing. If Sam and Kristin were close later in life, then her story cannot be reduced to the moment she lost custody. That was one chapter, not the final definition of her motherhood. This is important for anyone who has made mistakes as a parent, child, sibling, or spouse. A terrible chapter can leave scars, but it does not always have to be the last chapter. Healing is possible, though never guaranteed. It often comes slowly, privately, and without applause. Kristin's health declined in her later years. Around 2017, she reportedly experienced a severe health scare and fell into a coma. Her daughter Tracy later described seeing signs that her mother was still fighting. That image is powerful because it mirrors Kristin's entire life. Even when broken, she fought. Even when judged, she fought. Even when forgotten, she fought. She recovered from that crisis, but not for long. On April 27, 2018, Kristin Nelson died of a heart attack at her home in Santa Fe. She was 72 years old. And then came one final, quiet tragedy, almost no one seemed to notice. Her daughter Tracy posted about her death on social media, praising her mother's spirit and personality. But the wider media response was strangely muted. The story suggests that attention came only indirectly because Mark Harmon's show NCIS was airing a major season finale around the same time, causing people to notice the family connection. Think about the sadness of that. A woman who had once been part of one of America's most famous television families, who had married Ricky Nelson, who had created art admired by important people, who had acted, raised children, survived addiction, fought public battles, and lived through tragedy, left the world almost quietly, nearly overlooked. There is something deeply painful in that ending. But maybe it is also revealing. Hollywood remembers people unevenly. Some are preserved as legends. Some become footnotes in someone else's biography. Some women, especially, are remembered mainly when their lives intersect with more famous men. Kristin Nelson became Ricky Nelson's wife, Mark Harmon's sister, Tom Harmon's daughter, Tracy, and the twins' mother. But who was she when not defined by them? That is the question her story asks us to consider. She was a painter. She was a young girl pushed too early into adult life. She was a wife inside a marriage that looked better from the outside than it felt on the inside. She was a mother who made mistakes and still loved her children. She was a woman who struggled with substances and still sought recovery. She was a sister who was helped and hurt by family intervention. She was someone who lived long enough to see the world move on from the image that had once trapped her. And she was human. That may sound simple, but it is the truth most often denied to people in public scandals. We turn them into symbols. The bad mother. The wild wife. The fallen beauty. The bitter ex. The troubled sister. The forgotten actress. But labels are easier than empathy. Empathy does not mean excusing everything. It does not mean pretending Kristin never hurt anyone. It does not mean ignoring the fear her son may have felt, or the concern Mark Harmon may have had, or the pain her children experienced. Empathy means holding the whole picture without reducing the person to the ugliest frame. In Kristin's story, there are no clean heroes. Some of the most troubled homes have the most beautiful holiday cards. Some of the most broken marriages produce the most convincing public smiles. Kristin Nelson's life warns us not to worship the image. It also challenges us to think differently about women who fall apart in public. When a woman becomes a mother young, marries into expectation, tries to survive a husband's fame, deals with betrayal, struggles with addiction, loses financial security, fights for her children, and then becomes the subject of public judgment, we should be careful before we speak about her as though her failures are the entire story. We should ask, who helped her? Who dismissed her? Who benefited from her silence? Who judged her only after the damage was already done? Who protected the image while the person was breaking? These questions do not erase responsibility. They deepen it. Kristin was responsible for her choices. But she also lived inside systems that made honesty difficult: celebrity culture, family branding, gender expectations, addiction denial, and public shame. There is another lesson here about intervention. Mark Harmon's role in the story is complicated because it raises a painful question: when does helping become taking over? If a loved one is struggling with addiction or mental instability, doing nothing can be dangerous. Children may need protection. Boundaries may be necessary. Courts may sometimes become involved. But intervention must be guided by humility, because the person being helped may experience it as humiliation. The goal should not be victory over the struggling person. The goal should be safety, recovery, and eventually restoration if restoration is possible. In Kristin's case, the legal fight nearly destroyed the family further. When Mark dropped the custody case and agreed to a therapeutic arrangement, the family moved from battle toward repair. That does not mean everything became easy. But it suggests that even in bitter conflict, someone can choose to stop escalating. That choice may have saved them from deeper ruin. For families watching this story today, that may be the most practical lesson: protect children, but do not turn protection into revenge. Tell the truth, but do not use truth as a weapon if healing is still possible. Set boundaries, but remember that the goal of a boundary is safety, not punishment. Kristin Nelson's life was full of broken boundaries. Public and private blurred. Family and business blurred. Love and image blurred. Help and betrayal blurred. Motherhood and legal judgment blurred. And yet, she kept returning to art, family, and survival. There is a quiet dignity in that. Not the clean dignity of a perfect life. Not the polished dignity of someone who always made wise choices. But the rough dignity of someone who kept existing after humiliation. Someone who made mistakes and still wanted love. Someone who was remembered tenderly by her children, even after everything. That matters. At the end of her life, Kristin was not standing under television lights. She was not the teenage bride of America's favorite son. She was not the scandal figure in a custody headline. She was a woman in Santa Fe, living the final chapter of a life that had been far more painful and complicated than outsiders could understand. Maybe the world did not notice enough when she died. But we can notice now. We can look again and see the person behind the family names. We can see the young artist who painted the Kennedys. We can see the 17-year-old girl pushed into marriage because pregnancy threatened a wholesome image. We can see the wife trying to hold a family together while fame pulled her husband away. We can see the mother whose struggles frightened the people who loved her. We can see the sister who felt rescued, then betrayed. We can see the woman who lost, fought, recovered, failed, tried again, and kept living. And maybe, by seeing her more fully, we do something history often fails to do: we give complexity back to a woman who was reduced to scandal. Kristin Nelson's story does not end with a perfect redemption. Life rarely does. There is no final scene where every wound closes, every apology is spoken, every misunderstanding disappears. Her story ends more quietly, with children who still remembered her, a legacy scattered across television, music, art, and family memory, and a question for all of us: how many people have we misunderstood because we only saw the mess and not the pain beneath it? That question matters. Because every family has a public version and a private version. Every person has a chapter they hope will not define them. Every mother, father, sibling, child, and spouse carries some mixture of love and regret. The difference with Kristin Nelson is that her private chapters became public. And once pain becomes public, the world often loses its mercy. But we do not have to. We can tell the story differently. Not as gossip. Not as judgment. Not as entertainment built on someone else's collapse.